So today I've got a case study for you on a deal that I'm currently 4 years into and is actually not even over yet. So this one involves trying to reach out to the borrower to work out a deal, foreclosure, bankruptcy. We've even got a kitchen fire thrown in the mix and actually a whole lot more. So stay tuned if you want to learn more about this wild ride that I've been on. All right. So my name is Dan Deppen. You can find me at the Note Investor Podcast and the Fusion Notes YouTube channel, fusionnotes.com. And today, what I have for you is part of a case study that, as I just mentioned, is not quite over yet. So, this is a non performing note in Jackson, Mississippi. And this is a deal that's had a whole lot of twists and turns. It's been a very interesting ride. I'm actually about 4 years into it at this point. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to be able to tell you how this one ends because it's not actually over yet, and I don't even know. But that's just part of this game. This deal is definitely highly unusual, not the normal, not the normal deal, but makes for one of the better case studies, I think. So I'm going to start here by talking about the going in plan on this note and give you some of the background on it. There's a contract for deed in Jackson, Mississippi. Uh, so bought this note, like I said, about 4 years ago. Bought it for $11,500, which was a substantial discount to the unpaid balance, which was a little over 27,000. Um, it- Part of the reason I got it at such a good price was I bought this from a smaller fund that was in the process of shutting down. So if you look at the pricing you can get on a given note, you'll find that the note market isn't necessarily very efficient or smooth. A lot of the reasons you get certain either high or low pricing depends on why the person's selling it. In this case, when someone's closing down a fund, that's one of the ideal times that you can buy. So loan balance, a little over 27,000. Didn't actually have any delinquent taxes at the time. And the BPO value, which is the broker price opinion, kind of on the low side, right? So they gave me a BPO value of 53,000 with a quick sale value of about 45,000. So a little bit sketchy from a value standpoint. One of the challenges with these lower BPO properties is that when um, you have that lower value, if you end up having to foreclose, these properties are often kind of messed up, and that lower value often doesn't justify fixing them. But I'll go into why I like this deal. So if we look at the pay history, right? If you look at the last 12 months, there were actually 15 payments made in four separate transactions. So this borrower had a history of falling behind on the loan and then maybe making a bunch of payments at once and kind of getting caught up and then following behind and then making some more payments and on and on and on and on. So if I looked at like the last 12 months before I actually purchased this loan, there was one payment September of 18. A couple months later, made seven payments, skipped a couple, made one payment, skipped 5 months, and then made six payments, which actually came in right before I bought the note. Um, I didn't get to collect those six payments that came in right before I bought the note, but this gave me a lot of confidence going into it. Now, what was my strategy on this? So, given this borrower had a history of making sporadic payments, and this is actually a fairly common thing on these type of loans, my main focus was trying to get him to where he could make payments on a regular basis. So, given that he had made a lot of payments even sporadically, seemed that he had an interest in staying in this property. And I bought this note at a significant discount. So, if I could get to the point where I could just get the borrower somewhat back on track, maybe reset the loan where they were making regular payments or it was either performing or at least kind of closer to performing, I'm going to dramatically increase the value of the loan and have a really good outcome on this. Some of my thinking going in was that where I've had success with borrowers like this in the past is if you get them to take to heart that if they don't keep up the loan, you are going to take it through the foreclosure process, or in this case, it's technically the forfeiture process because it's a land contract. that they are going to eventually lose the house, and often that triggers them to get back on track. The other thing I was thinking is that this could be a financial literacy issue. I actually had a previous borrower who coincidentally was in Jackson, Mississippi, who just didn't understand that he was supposed to pay the exact P&I amount every month. And so he would send in like these random amounts and make these sporadic payments. And once I had a conversation with him to explain to them that just no, don't send in these random amounts, send in the exact amount, we were good to go. So again, it was a financial literacy issue. Like he genuinely did not understand that, which is kind of scary, but that's the kind of thing that happens. So plan was to reach out to the borrower, see if I can get them making regular payments, and then my fallback plan, if that didn't work, well then I'll proceed with the forfeiture. One of the things I like about Mississippi is generally speaking, maybe not in this case as it turned out, forfeitures are generally relatively quick and inexpensive. All right, so looking at my ROI estimates. So my reperform scenario, which was the scenario I felt like was most likely, assuming a 14-month timeline, right? So there's going to be about a month or so, maybe to get the loan boarded and transferred, a month to reach out to the borrower, get some agreement in place, get them making trial payments, and then I would hold and season the loan for about 12 months, and then go ahead and resell it. And I was assuming I would just resell the CFD at 70% of UPB. The market was a lot different. 4 years ago, pricing is higher now. So instead of planning to sell at 70% of UPB, I mean, these days I'd probably be planning to sell at 85% plus, possibly north of 90. I was assuming my total all-in costs were going to be about 13,000. So I had paid 11,500 for the note, but then I might have some legal fees. I had to pay for that BPO, my O&E report, loan servicing, et cetera, et cetera. I figured that was going to be about 1,500 altogether. And so if I got the loan reperforming, sold it at 70% of UPB, then I would get about 22,500 in proceeds um, altogether. So this is going to give me a massive, really healthy ROI, about 73% overall. Now, did use a joint venture partner on this, so I'd have outside funding with a 50-50 profit split. And so I looked at each of us getting about $4,750 and a 37% return, which is super solid. Again, a lot of the reason those ROIs are so high was just because of the screaming deal I got when I bought the loan. Now, if I had to go the forfeiture route, I was looking at about a 12-month timeline, so figured about month for the onboarding, about 3 months to do the loss mitigation and figure out if the borrower is going to be able to get on track or not. And then I was figuring about 5 months for that forfeiture process, and then maybe another 3 months to evict the borrower if needed and get the home sold. So in this case, I was looking at all-in cost of about 19,000. So again, note price 11,500, and then I was assuming about 7,500 for legal fees, clean out costs, due diligence, delinquent taxes, insurance, all those other costs associated with handling an REO. Now, I was being pretty conservative with what I thought I could sell the property for. So I mentioned that my BPO, my quick sale BPO value was 45,000, and I was assuming that I would get proceeds of about 30,000 on that sale. So the BPO is 45,000. Generally, if you're taking it through a foreclosure, the property's in rougher shape, so you're not actually selling it for what the BPO is worth. You're selling it for something less. And then you're going to have some selling costs. And so I was assuming about 30,000 in proceeds overall. This was still going to give us about a 58% ROI or about 29% each to myself and the joint venture partner. So still looking like a pretty good deal. All right, now getting started into this one. That's the background. So step one is to do the loan mitigation and reach out to the borrower. So I sent a door knocker over to make contact, was able to have some conversations with the borrower, and the borrower agreed to a forbearance agreement. So the structure that we put in place had no good faith down payment. Generally, I like to collect a good faith down payment. It's good because it gives borrowers skin in the game out the gate, but I didn't do that this time. Um, just wanted to make the next 6 payments on time and then get the loan reset. If I had a do over on this, These days, I probably would have taken a little bit of a tougher line where I would have insisted on the good faith down payment. The other thing I do a little different now than I did then was I generally want uh, 12 trial payments on time instead of the six. But anyway, that's what I did here. So we came up with this agreement, sent the agreement over to the borrower to sign. And that first month in December, he did not return the signed agreement and also didn't send in any payments. So when we got to January, I started the legal process, had my attorney fire off a demand letter just to very quickly move into that. February, borrower made contact, came back with the updated. He did sign the forbearance agreement. We had to shift the dates a little bit because we had lost a few months. And then the borrower sent in a payment. So I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe this is going the way I thought, and that the borrower needs to get the understanding that he's probably going to lose the property if he keeps messing around with this. So I'm like, we're in good shape. So after sending in that initial payment in February, March, April of 2020, he didn't send any more payments. So he sent the one payment in to get me to stop legal, skips 2 months, May, I restart legal, send another demand letter. So now it's back on, right? It's the second round of legal. June, borrower sends in 3 payments to cover March, April, May, and I stop legal again to accept them. Sending the demand letter is pretty cheap, generally costs about $100. Um, so I went ahead and accepted the payments. One thing to note is that when you're in this legal process, if you accept any payments from the borrower short of a full reinstatement, then you can't continue with the legal process. You would have to start over again. And for me, my main goal is ultimately to get the borrower paying again. So when the borrower does send in payments, I have a tendency to accept them and stop legal to give them a chance to get on track because I don't want an REO in Jackson, Mississippi, and especially on a lower value property, I really don't want it. So while I could definitely take a much harder line throughout this process, what I'm really doing is trying to keep the borrower in the home, and I'm going out of my way not to end up with an REO. So that's part of my thinking as we truck through this process. Now we get to July, August, borrower sends in payments. Great. I'm like, maybe I've got this one on track. September, he sends in a payment, but then it bounced. Then October, he sent in a payment that did clear. So we're kind of in this mode of where the borrower is just not making regular payments, not really fulfilling the trial payment plan, and I'm wondering what I'm going to need to do to get this on track. 'Cause this seems to be the kind of borrower who, and I've had a lot of these borrowers, they never quite make all the payments on time, but they never quite let it go all the way to foreclosure either. And then in October, the borrower filed for bankruptcy, Chapter 13. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But before we get into the bankruptcy part, you might be thinking about how you can learn to do all of this yourself and how you might be able to get in the game and become an active note investor. So if you want to learn how to do this, here's what you do. Go to fusionnotes.com/courses, and they're going to be able to find all the knowledge that you need to go from a beginning note investor all the way up to a full-time note investor. So you'll learn how to find these deals yourself, do due diligence, price them, do seller finance, how to handle these foreclosures, how to deal with bankruptcies, which we're going to talk about here in a second, even take on outside funding, and a whole lot more. So if you want to get started on this, go to fusionnotes.com/courses, and you can actually get started on this today. But okay, so back to the bankruptcy. So once the borrower files bankruptcy, he filed Chapter 13. There are basically two kinds of bankruptcies you could encounter. Chapter 7 or Chapter 13, which is like a restructuring type of bankruptcy. I'm not going to nerd out on bankruptcy in this video. I've done that in some others, and I've got some other content I'm going to produce in the future where I go into more depth on that. But as the lender, when the borrower files bankruptcy, first thing you need to do is file a proof of claim. What that proof of claim does is says, hey, I am a lender and this person who filed bankruptcy owes me a debt and this debt needs to be considered in the bankruptcy plan. If you fail to file the proof of claim, your your debt can actually potentially get wiped out if you never file that. So if you want to know and the borrower files bankruptcy, it is super, super important you get that proof of claim in there right away. Otherwise, it can cause problems down the road. So this bankruptcy process can take several months sometime, and he filed bankruptcy actually in the midst of COVID. A lot of courts were closed. It just slowed down all of these processes. So even though he filed this, towards the end of 2020, they didn't actually get the bankruptcy plan in place until April 2021. Now, the way that these plans are put in place is generally the borrower will make two payments. So they'll have one bucket that's the arrearages and then one bucket that's the actual loan balance. Borrower makes payments to a trustee and then the trustee disperses those payments to you as the lender. And from May to October of 2021, I received the payments from the trustee as expected. One of the interesting things about bankruptcy is it can actually be a good thing for the lender. Because if the borrower doesn't make those payments to the trustee and keep things on track, then the bankruptcy can get dismissed and then you can proceed with a foreclosure. But in this case, the borrower was making, 5 or 6 payments in a row through the trustee. Things are looking good. Things are on track. And then in October 2021, the borrower voluntarily dismissed the BK. And this was super puzzling to me. This is kind of unusual, I think. At least I haven't seen this before. Generally, when a bankruptcy gets dismissed, it's because the borrower didn't follow through on the plan. A dismissal is different than a discharge. A discharge means like the borrower actually completed the plan and then completed the bankruptcy and it was discharged. This was a dismissal, so the borrower was essentially taking himself out of bankruptcy voluntarily on its own. And I did learn later why this happened, but I'm not going to get into that just now. I'm going to save that for down the road. He actually did have a good reason for doing that, as it turned out. Okay, so now the borrower's out of bankruptcy and we're in the post bankruptcy world. We get to November 2021 and the borrower actually makes 4 payments. And this was exciting because, he was making payments during the bankruptcy. He went out of bankruptcy. I was worried. I'm like, okay, this guy's going to stop making payments now, but then he actually makes 4. Get to December 2021, the borrower made 2. And so at this point, he's only 9 payments behind, which isn't too bad. And I'm like, oh, it looks like this borrower is working on getting it back on track and getting the loan caught up. This is awesome. So I'm feeling fantastic about this at this point. And then we get to January, February, no payments are received. So back to where they were. So if you haven't noticed, there's some clear trends here, right? Like the borrower, like it kind of looks like he's going to pay and then he doesn't. And then it kind of looks like he's going to pay and then he doesn't. And on and on and on and on. Then I get notified by my loan servicer, Ally, that there was an insurance claim. Now, throughout this, the borrower wasn't paying for insurance, never provided insurance, so I had forced place insurance on this whole time. Actually, still do to this day. Um, but Allied had messaged me, said there was this insurance claim, that there was some kind of a kitchen fire in the property, and the borrower was calling the servicer like daily, saying that the claim was taking too long. Um, I had a conversation with the borrower. He was really all over the map, to put it lightly. This guy is quite the character. It's really hard to understand what he's talking about. He doesn't really ever tell a coherent story. He's talking about something over here and then talking about something over there. And so I had a hard time figuring out exactly what the situation was. When I went back and talked to Allied, what they were saying was that for the final insurance payment, there had to be some inspections of the electrical, right, after the fixes. And the problem was the borrower kept rescheduling this, and then the inspector couldn't get a hold of him to reschedule again, right? So on one hand, the borrower's not cooperating with the inspection needed to get the final payment, but then he's calling and complaining that he's not getting the final payment, and that's kind of par for the course for this dude. But eventually, it all got worked out. They got the inspection done. Um, Insurance made the payout to the borrower to repair the damage, and we were good to go. I mentioned this kitchen fire because this is going to come up much later in the story in kind of an interesting way. So after the fire, we get to March, borrower makes 5 payments. So we're back to this cycle, right? Makes a bunch of payments, skips 2 months, makes five. However, after that payment, those 5 payments I received in March of 2022, I've never received another payment on this loan since. And so at the time of this recording in September 2023, that was 18 months ago. Gave the borrower another couple months to see if more payments were going to come in. And then June of 2022, I restarted the legal process for what is that? The third time, I believe. So we'll see if the third time is the charm. Next time, this is such a long story. I have a really long ways to go. So I'm going to break this up into another video and continue this next time soon. So hope you're enjoying this case study so far. Also hope you come back for part two to learn where it goes next. And like I mentioned, this one is actually not done yet, so there's most likely going to be a part three as well. So thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.